When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, welcome back to the 10th day of the Winds of Winter event. Oh, actually, I got this wrong. This is the 9th day. John Con was the 10th day, so that might be messed up in the videos, and you guys can roast me in the comments if you'd like. But we are into the 9th day of the Winds of Winter event, and we're covering Euron. I'm once again joined by JC.
Hey everybody, what's up? Good to see you.
And we're going to be talking all about our favorite villain, Euron. And there's a lot to go through because this is, in my opinion, one of the most mysterious characters, one of the most magical characters. There's almost a lot and a little at the same time to try and speculate onto what he's actually going to do. We see him through the Forsaken chapter, probably the darkest chapter in A Song of Ice and Fire. In my opinion, it is the darkest chapter. But we're going to start out, kind of give a little bit of a recap, and then we'll build into some of the predictions, what we think Euron could be doing. But in this Forsaken chapter, we basically get this. This is kind of the summed up version outside of all the stuff going on to Aeron's torture. But they're doing these raids on the Arbor. They're trying to basically draw forces to them almost and acting like they're going to take these places to hold them, and then they go on to some other place. We see that religious figures are being gathered for some grand, seems like, sacrifice that Euron is trying to do. Even has this salt wife and child tied to the prows with Euron. So again, it's just a major blood sacrifice. You're sacrificing your own blood. You're sacrificing all these different people that were established for these different religions. And they're basically heading towards Oldtown to meet the Hightower fleet before the Red Wine fleet is upon them, because they're kind of caught in between almost two different fleets at this point. You have the Red Wines coming over from the eastern side and coming to south through Dorne, trying to meet up to then take on Euron. And then you also have Oldtown, which seems like the primary target as of right now for the character of Euron. So, JC, I guess I want to ask you, like, what do you think is going to occur with Euron at this time, kind of heading towards Oldtown?
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, Euron Damphair, who's our main POV perspective in the Forsaken chapter, through him we see just kind of Euron feeding Euron Damphair this kind of this blue substance, this blue liquid, and through that it's kind of like a hallucinogen. Yep. And so Euron Damphair has these nightmares about Euron Greyjoy summoning a kraken and, laughing with a naked woman and just doing all sorts of debaucherous things that Euron Damphair finds unappealing. So Euron Greyjoy, as far as any other character within this series, is probably the most, Melisandre notwithstanding, the most mystical. He has the most, I guess, like eldritch, dark magic aura associated with him. And that makes him completely different from all our other villains within the story, because he has a kind of a magical component associated with him.
Unless you believe Roose is a vampire, but continue.
The bolt-on theory, yes,
that's right.
Yes. So, given that Euron, and also given Euron having currently a full suit armor of Valyrian steel, an alleged dragon horn and an alleged dragon egg, and him allegedly having ventured into Old Valyria, this man is crazy, and he's the real deal. And in my opinion, he's definitely, White Walkers notwithstanding, he is the final boss of the A Song of Ice and Fire series. He is the big main villain. Yep. That's probably going to be our big villain in A Dream of Spring. But as far as what he does in the Winds of Winter and where do I see him go from here, I do think he will arrive into Oldtown before the Red Wine fleet arrives, and then whether or not Euron Damphair dies on the prow of Euron Greyjoy's ship, as Euron Greyjoy had tied Euron Damphair to the prow of his ship at the end of the Forsaken sample chapter, whether or not Euron Damphair dies there or he doesn't, I think we will see another POV perspective focusing on Euron in Oldtown, from Samwell Tarly's perspective, who has just arrived into Oldtown at the end of A Feast for Crows. So there, I think Euron will take over Oldtown, and we will definitely see him kind of start to I don't know whether to begin occupying parts of the westernmost regions of the Reach, or whether he'll just use Old Town as kind of a temporary pit stop before he continues on his merry way to wherever it is he's going next. But Greece, what do you think?
So I think that see, I've always said this in the past, and this is why I always like having guests on for Euron, because I really just I have not a really strong opinion on Euron. Whereas like a lot of other characters I have like very strong opinions on at times. Euron's not one of them. Euron is
Hmm.
the very magical side of the story, which I myself I kind of struggle with my analysis of the magical side of the world. I like more of the realism side of the world, the nitty gritty, you know, like Brienne's chapters and the Riverlands, or Arya's chapters in the Riverlands, stuff like that. And so Euron is in this weird situation because, you know, majority of his fleet goes with Victarion, which seems to be to go get Daenerys. And so there's so many motivations here that seem to be contradictory. Like, why would Euron do that? Like, Euron knows Victarion better than that. And
Yeah.
so, you know, you have this aspect of, okay, well, what is Dragonbinder going to do? What is this? It seems like he's doing a blood ritual, from what I can tell, right? What is he attempting to do? Is he trying to have Krakens, you know, help him take out one of these fleets, whether it's the Red Wine fleet, whether it's, you know, whatever ships the High Towers have at this time, trying to defend Oldtown? I think that will come into play at some point. I just don't know if it's going to be towards the bigger fleet, which is the Red Wine fleet, or it's going to be in this kind of initial battle of him trying to take Oldtown. Because the other part of this that I think is fascinating and something we're going to talk about in tomorrow's video with John Con is the timeline of events. Because Samwell, you have to assume, is going to have at least a couple POVs of trying to become a maester, of uncovering any type of, you know, plot lines or histories that George wants to tell us. Being in Old Town is the perfect place, just to learn information, to uncover this Maester conspiracy thing that Marwyn's talking about. You then also have a Faceless Men plot going on in Old Town. There's just so many plot lines that are all heading towards Old Town, and Samwell and Euron are the only two POVs really in that area. So what do we, you know, see from that? Like, do we get a couple of chapters before Euron actually gets to Old Town? I think that could be very possible, given the fact that you would like to see some sort of kind of build up to it, like the calm before the storm. You know, letting Samwell at least learn a little bit, and then you also have the factor of, okay, you then also have this idea that Leighton Hightower, maybe he's doing magic or he's doing something he's not really seen of. Like, there's just so many mysteries with Old Town. It's probably the most mysterious plotline in the book right now. And so you have all these things kind of colliding. And like you mentioned, he's got this Valyrian steel armor. He has this deep knowledge, it would seem, of the horns. With Dragonbinder, I have speculated that the Horn of Winter is the horn Sam has currently, just based upon the fact that he's drawn so much attention to this horn that if it was just some broken horn, why does he reference it so many times? Whether that's through John or Sam. But I do think that, like you said, I think at least Euron will occupy Old Town for a time. I don't think it will be something that, like, he makes this his stronghold or anything like that. But I think he, like so many other characters, maybe is looking for some sort of information at Old Town, or some sort of prophecy or dreams he's having has told him Old Town is the key to that. And maybe that's to bring an apocalypse. Maybe that's to have the threat of the others be awakened, the wall coming down, whatever. That was a lot, JC. What do you think about anything that I said, or if you want to continue on? I kind of went on there for a while. There's a lot to introduce with Old Town.
Yeah, there's a lot to Old Town, and then there's also a lot to the Euron Greyjoy character because he's definitely the most one of the most mysterious characters that we've only gotten kind of a few chapters insight into, but we haven't really gotten kind of a full insight to, like we have into Joffrey or Stannis. Um, to your point about how the magical component, you kind of get lost a little bit with some of the more magical components of the series. I would tend to agree. Like some of Melisandre's shadow binding in A Clash of Kings, you know, like it's cool, but there is definitely more of, in my opinion as well, there's definitely more intrigue involved with some of the more realistic political elements of the story than there is with, you know, the possibility of Euron Greyjoy summoning Krakens, which it seems a little too ridiculous, even for this story that has magic in it. Seems a little too ridiculous for this story. So I don't know if George R. R. Martin will go that far, by the way, uh, but as far as like some of the other dark mysticism behind his character, I think there is the potential for some very cool, kind of just awesome, mysteriously dark things that George could delve into with Euron Greyjoy's character for the Winds of Winter. Um, so I don't think like you're far out of line for thinking that like, oh, this is what the heck is this? I don't want any magic stuff in my books.
I will say I have a bias because like a lot of my viewers know I watched a good portion of the show before I got into the books. And so the show very much leans away from the magic, right? That's why
Yeah.
Euron's character basically doesn't even function in terms of the book character because they stripped him of everything that makes him interesting. But you have that, and then I've just never been like a big magic person in general. Like if you look at like
Yeah.
just modern fantasy, I'm not somebody like if I play, for instance, the Dragon Age series, not really I'm never going a magical character or anything like that. But off the point, that's just that's my bias and all that stuff. But it's kind of like you look at it and you go, how much can George like do magical wise? Like this is a conversation that I had with Ricky, last year when we were talking about because I made multiple videos on things Euron is what people have theorized he could do. Is he gonna get a dragon because of Dragonbinder because he's the true master of it? Is he gonna get krakens? Is he himself gonna turn into like this kraken creature that Euron sees in one of his dreams and visions while he's on the Iron Throne? Is he gonna bring down the wall with the Horn of Winter? It's like how much can you give this character that's like world changing in the span of like one book or whatever? And so that's the question I have. Like, what is his goal? Like, what is his motivation of taking Oldtown? How does that further his ambitions and goals of becoming king of Westeros? And that's the thing that George just hasn't really given us because we haven't gotten inside of Euron's, brain much. Like we've seen him through Victarion, like very briefly when they have a private conversation in A Feast for Crows. We've seen him very briefly at times with Euron. We just don't have a lot of the character. And so that's what I mean. Like there's almost two ways of this. Like there's a lot of information and there's a little information. Whereas
Yeah.
Euron is not fleshed out completely yet. Whereas like other characters like Joffrey are very fleshed out. Ramsay is given a lot of time to be fleshed out. Euron is not that same way. And so Winds of Winter, I think, will be a lot about uncovering him as a character. And
Oh
so
yeah.
the question I then have, for you as we transition into, him occupying Oldtown, do you think, he will have interactions with Samwell? How do you think that all goes down when he actually has taken Oldtown and all that?
I think he will have an interaction with Sam. He kind of has to, given that Sam is our only POV character within Oldtown. Aeron
Yeah.
Damphair notwithstanding. And I'm assuming Aeron Damphair is not long for this world. I mean,
I
he
agree.
could live a little bit longer, but
It's time for
um,
him to go. We gotta close down all these POVs. It's time to go.
yeah, we've got 20 POVs in the Winds of Winter. Some of them got to go. Aeron Damphair, sorry to say, he's kind of the most disposable one, so get him out of here.
Yeah.
um, So I think he will have, whether it's minor, I think it'll just be a minor interaction, but Samwell Tarly will have to interact with Euron Greyjoy somehow in order to allow us as the reader to have any sort of insight into Euron Greyjoy. And to your statement earlier about how we haven't really gotten any chapters that flesh out the Euron Greyjoy character, that's very true. We've only had kind of a couple chapters here and there. The Forsaken sample chapter from the Winds of Winter is probably the closest we've
Yes.
gotten into
100%.
uncovering Euron's character. And I think there will be more of those chapters within the Winds of Winter where we kind of get a bigger, deeper insight into Euron Greyjoy. I personally think, and this is based on just kind of both my speculation and then also sort of what we saw when Euron Greyjoy was first introduced into the Game of Thrones TV show. Granted, the TV show is kind of by season 6, it was kind of its own separate animal that has nothing to do with the books, but there was a smidgen there of the Euron that I think George R. R. Martin was going for, where Euron Greyjoy is on the swaying bridge with Balon Greyjoy in season 6, which happens off screen in A Storm of Swords. But Euron Greyjoy essentially tells Balon Greyjoy that I am the drowned god. And I think there is definitely an element within the book's version of Euron Greyjoy where Euron does see himself as this godlike figure, this deity, this drowned god who wants to bring kind of in his own way chaos to the world where everyone looks at him as the deity. It's like, ah, yes, everybody look at me. I am the god. Like,
Yeah.
I will rule all of Planetos. And we will uncover more of that with each chapter in the Winds of Winter.
I agree. He's definitely got that ego to him. But I mean,
Oh, for sure.
you almost can like understand it though. Like given it's like he goes to Valyria, he comes back with all this stuff that is just it's very foreign to Westeros. This is like godly stuff he's bringing back. He's spitting in the face of all the other gods, which we know some of them at least have some power. We don't know maybe how that power works, but we know R'hllor to an extent has some sort of power. If you want to believe that Patchface is this drowned god prophet, you would assume there's some sort of power there because Patchface is not normal. It's interesting because he takes that opposite approach where we see so many characters that are influenced by religion. Euron is influenced by a religion, but not in the normal way. He's like, screw all the religions. I'm going to kill all your priests.
He is the religion.
I am the storm, okay? So it's a little bit like that. And it's, to me, it's so weird because, you think about where the character of Euron goes in the television show and he ends up alliancing with Cersei because it's really the last chance he has of getting on the throne, right? Daenerys is with Theon and Yara in the really, it still annoys me to say Yara in the show, given that Asha is one of my favorite characters. But I want to ask you because we get out of when he leaves Oldtown, if he does that in this book or the next book, do you see him possibly going with Cersei? I mean, they're going to be kind of close in proximity, given they're going to be on, both of them are going to be on the west coast of Westeros, given if we believe Cersei is going to go to Casterly Rock. Now, again, if this is going to happen, this feels way more like a Dream of Spring territory, in my opinion. But could you see something like that similar to the show happening?
Yeah, I mean, that plot point where Cersei allies with Euron Greyjoy in the show, I think that was a George R. R. Martin plot point that at some point they will ally. And based on also Aaron Dampire's vision that he has in the Forsaken Sample chapter of Euron being with this like crazy lady, I'm like, okay, that's probably foreshadowing here that Euron and Cersei will ally at some point. But I do think that is going to be something that's held off until either A Dream of Spring or whatever, if there are more than 7 books, whatever the book after the Winds of Winter will be. I don't think George R. R. Martin will be able to cover Cersei, and spoilers for our John Connington Winds of Winter prediction video, but we both, Grease and I, believe that Cersei will eventually make her way towards Casterly Rock, but we believe that it'll be pretty much close to the end of the Winds of Winter book. So if Euron were to ally with Cersei, which I think is a very real possibility given the geography of Oldtown and Casterly Rock being both on the western shores of Westeros, then I think it will have to happen at the beginning of book 7 as opposed to the Winds of Winter.
I agree. Something I was thinking about as we were talking that I don't even think I had initially down in our notes, but given the way Balon Greyjoy dies, it's very mysterious, and Euron even kind of implies he wasn't the person that necessarily killed like Balon, at least physically, but maybe gave orders for him to be killed or something like that. And people have speculated maybe that was the Faceless Men. It is kind of interesting, if Euron has dealings with the Faceless Men, and then, there's a Faceless Man in Oldtown. The character of Pate who dies in A Feast for Crows is still being masqueraded around by the Faceless Men. Will we see some sort of conversation there, or some sort of meeting of those two plot lines? What do you think about that, JC? Do you think we'll see any of that?
Yeah, I had completely forgotten that the popular theory is that it was a Faceless Man who pushed Balon Greyjoy off the swaying bridge in Pike. It would be interesting to see if there might be some sort of history there between the Faceless Men and Euron Greyjoy, because if Euron does make it to Oldtown and he interacts with Pate, who a lot of us have speculated is Jaqen H'ghar in disguise, then I don't know what sort of conversation is there, but that would be very interesting if they may have some sort of history, whether it's kind of a friendly platonic history. It's like, oh, remember when you hired us to kill, your older brother, or if it's like, oh, it's you again, kind of
Yeah.
that history. I'm not sure, but that is ripe for exploration if George R. R. Martin wants to explore that.
Yeah, because it's the weird thing is like, okay, so if we're gonna have Sam being our, which I believe he's gonna be our main look into anything we're gonna see with Euron and Oldtown or any of these other plot lines, because I think Euron is going to die relatively like soon. I don't think he's going to
Yeah,
be a POV that lasts majority of this book or anything. I think he's very much going to be like almost like an Eris Oakheart situation, like where in Feast for Crows he dies in at least the first half of the book. I think it's at least somewhere in there he dies. But I wonder because you have this Facelessman plot that you believe has to go somewhere in this book. I mean George, I feel like he wouldn't just set that up for it to just go nowhere. You're gonna have to have something there with Sam, and Sam is going to be in close proximity with this character we believe is Jack and Hagar. So, okay, well, how does that then work? Let's say Euron takes Samwell prisoner. If you even think about in terms of where Pate would also be, or Jaqen, I'd be in the same like proximity of Samwell. The two maybe even interacting more than we even think they would. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's a lot of questions that George throws out there that don't necessarily have answers yet. They're just, what is he going to do with them? The gardening style that we all love so much. But, I want to ask you, JC, because, as we're moving kind of, I would say towards the back second half of the story of Winds of Winter with Euron, what do you think will be like Leighton Hightower's role in this fight or this sack or whatever? Like, do you think he has some significant role in this plot line?
I want to say no because I think it would be one kind of one plot thread too many for this story that's already chock full of plot threads. But if he does, I I don't know if he'll be kind of a prisoner for Euron Greyjoy, given that Leighton Hightower has a rumored obsession with magic. Um, so I don't know if kind of Euron will see that and be like, oh, someone who believes in magic, he could be a potential sacrifice for me who also believes in magic and wants to be a god of this world. Um, but besides, a couple of minor interactions, I don't see anything major for Leighton Hightower in this book. I think it'd just be one plot thread too many, in my opinion.
I agree. Like, think about how crowded like everything is at this point. Like we've talked about how many different things that you would think is going to have to happen with Sam.
Yeah,
Whether if you even go the show route where Sam finds some sort of information on John's parentage, if he goes any deeper into this Maester conspiracy stuff, whether he goes into this Facelessman plot that he's going to have close proximity with, being our, look into Euron's dealings and his planning, his personality, there's just so much that is there that I don't know how much you could do with a Leighton Hightower out of just like he was studying magic and maybe Leighton Hightower even has some sort of respect for Euron based upon all the stuff he's done, being this very magical character. Maybe we get some more tidbits into the Hightower lore. They're a very mysterious house, especially before Fire and Blood came out. Like, they were one of the houses we knew almost nothing about. We don't see them really playing a significant role in the War of the Five Kings outside of, they have relation to the Tyrells. But yeah, I think it's just it's an overcrowded plot line. It's a plot
yeah.
line that, once again, like we talked about in the John Con video that you guys going to see tomorrow, there's a lot of stuff that I think George may have to, some of it may have to just, we don't get really that much of a conclusion of it, or if we do, it's very quick and kind of brief. But that kind of gets us to where, like, JC, where do you think Euron goes towards? Like, what do you think is the end of this book for him? Like, where do you think his plot line kind of concludes in this book?
In the Winds of Winter,
Yes, Winds of
I
Winter
think,
specifically.
yeah, because there's between the Winds of Winter where I ultimately see him winding up. But
Yes, yes,
as far as the Winds of Winter goes, I think because I do think him and Samuel will interact. And I
yes.
think at some point, whether it's taken by force or it's some kind of exchange, probably taken by force, I think Euron Greyjoy will see the horn that Sam has, and Euron might recognize it as like, oh, this is actually the horn of Joramun, the horn
Yeah.
that will bring down the wall. So he might take that from Sam And then at the end of the story, he might hear that like, oh, my goddess, my goddess wife Cersei Lannister has retreated to Casterly Rock. I will make her my wife if I can't have Daenerys as my wife, or if like Daenerys is too far away, or if he changes his mind or something. So I think I see the Winds of Winter book ending with Euron Greyjoy leaving Oldtown, sailing off towards Casterly Rock en route to meet Cersei Lannister.
So I would be interested. So do you think the wall comes down in this book? Do you think it's in a future book?
Future.
Future book?
For sure. I was going to say, like, again, this book is way too crowded, and given what we think is going to happen with Cersei Lannister's plotline, with her winding up at Casterly Rock at the end of the Winds of Winter, I think Euron Greyjoy first meets Cersei, befriends her. Maybe they have kind of an alliance there, a Lannister slash Iron Fleet alliance, and then maybe Euron Greyjoy tells Cersei, "Is like, oh, don't worry, like we'll take back King's Landing from those fools. Like, come with me, my godly goddess wife, and let's take down the wall and ruin all of Planetos, because we are the gods of this world." And Cersei, also being an egotistical maniac who's full of herself, she's like, all right, fellow egotistical maniac who's also full of himself, let's both go together to the wall and blow this thing down and make Westeros suffer for ever trying to, take us down.
Agreed. My thing is just, and you've talked about this on numerous, occasions, that you think there needs to be another book. And I think with what George has and what he has said is his goal, he wants it to be finished with Winds of Winter and a Journey of Spring. I just feel like the wall has to come down like sooner rather than later. like it just needs to, because how do you get the whole, whatever you're planning with the others, whether it's going to be just a war, and if it's the living versus the evil, and there's not as much as the background of the others, which I don't think is the case. But based off of like kind of the show stuff, what they did, I don't think that's gonna be the case. But still, how are you gonna do this whole conflict in just one book? And the wall isn't even like the others aren't even crossing into the southern parts of, or Westeros, or even the north, until the very last book. It's the problem that we've talked about on repeat, is that there's some plot lines that are very far ahead, and there's some that are very far behind. And
yeah,
the North, I almost believe, is one of, I think the two, which is crazy given how much we get of these plot lines in both, Dance and even Storm. But like the North plot line is super far behind. And the Marine plot line, the SS plot line, is very far behind. Like how do you have a situation where you go into the last book, Daenerys hasn't even met Jon Snow, hasn't even interacted with any of Westeros. The others are not even really a main threat yet, because they haven't crossed the wall yet at all. Like to Jon, to the Night's Watch and the Wildlings, and maybe some of the Northern Houses, they're a threat. But like to everybody else, like how do you get people to then go, okay, we then got to turn around and have this others plot line? Either the last book is going to be huge alongside of Winds of Winter, but even maybe bigger, or you're going to have to break it up into another book. So JC, I'll let you talk on that, because I think this is one of your big ideas. But
yeah, there's no way this story ends in 7 books, despite what George R. R. Martin claims. George R. R. Martin also initially claimed that A Song of Ice and Fire series was only going to be a trilogy, and that the first book in that trilogy was going to be The War of the Five Kings. Well, surprise, surprise, that first book wound up being 3 books, with Game of Thrones Through a Storm of Swords. And then he said that the second book in the trilogy was going to consist of Daenerys' arrival into Westeros. Well, surprise, surprise, we've already finished 5 books, and we have yet to get to that point. So if that allegedly is going to happen in book 6, which I doubt, I think it's going to be pushed off till the beginning of book 7, then we've already gone through 6, 7-ish books, only covering the first 2/3 of George R. R. Martin's initial outline. And the third book in that outline was The Invasion of the Others. We haven't even touched that, barely touched that. There's just no way George wraps this up within 7 books. I'm thinking 8 minimum, as far as what's left to go with the story. And, obviously George has the problem as well. It's like, well, okay, well, some of these plot threads I can finish off in 7 books, but some of these other plot threads, like Daenerys Targaryen, she's further behind on her character arc. there's no way I could get it to 7 books. I think he's gonna have to mess around with the timeline a bit and be like, all right, well, Euron Greyjoy, he sails towards Casterly Rock. Well, sailing on the water is much faster than walking, so yeah, maybe he gets there
Yeah.
much quicker. And Daenerys, she sails towards Westeros. Well, sailing on the water is faster than this. And then maybe he slows down the Golden Company army. It's like, oh, the Golden Company, John Connington, young Griff. Well, they're marching by foot. They gotta go to sleep at night. Gotta rest, make camp. Maybe he slows that timeline down for those
He does
characters.
a Renly. He just kind of does some turnies and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. The last thing I think any of us want to happen is for George to rush. Well, we just want 2 more books.
Yeah.
We just want 2 more books, but with the caveat being that George also doesn't have our characters kind of fast travel between these multiple locations, kind of what happened with the last couple of seasons in Game of Thrones. So I hope that he's able to tell the story he's able to tell with, the next 2 books, but I just don't think it's likely given what we have left to tell.
I agree. I even think about Bran. I mean, how do you have a kid that he can't walk? So how are you gonna and he doesn't appear in the entire second half of Dance, which is actually a crime, by the way. Bran finally gets good, and then we're cut off. He cuts us off just like that, and he's like, "Here, take more mixed Tyrion and Theon. Give us more Tyrion messing around." But that's a whole nother thing. But maybe we'll just see, like you said, maybe we'll come back and Bran is like, he's recounting all of what has happened in between that gap, and we're basically already ready where he's almost about to leave. That's the struggle. Bringing all these plans together. It's why I say the North is very far behind and needs to, get going. And I think to D&D's, I'm not even gonna say credit, but I understand why they did certain things because they wanted to get this show done in 8 seasons. Well, how do you do that with a Stannis character that is still very much a threat? How do you then shift that to Jon leading the North? How do you then shift that to Jon convincing the rest of the world that there's this threat of the others and all this stuff? And it's very apparent in the last couple seasons that they just didn't know how to do that. They're not as creative as George. They didn't care about it as much as George, all those things. That's where we're kind of left at. But yeah, JC, go ahead.
What could have solved this easily is, so George R. R. Martin has stated in interviews that he initially intended for there to be a 5-year time skip between A Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows in order to grow up the child characters. I think what would have solved this is, okay, he decided not to do the 5-year time skip because although it made sense for, Arya, Sansa, and Jon, it didn't make sense for Stannis. It's like, oh, what's Stannis going to do at the wall for just 5 years? Nothing. Like, that doesn't make any sense. However, I think maybe not a 5-year time skip, but a 1-year time skip could have worked. Because then it's like, all right, Stannis being at the wall for like a full year as he's gathering resources. Maybe he's not even at the wall. Maybe he finally moved down towards, the northern towns, the northern mountain towns close to Winterfell to, grab some forces. And, 1 year, we could have started A Feast for Crows or A Dance with Dragons with Tyrion already being in Meereen, with Arya already being well underway in her character arc as she trains to be a faceless person. We could have been farther along on these stories so that, like, okay, at the start of A Feast for Crows, we've already skipped a good chunk of story that for the most part is kind of bloat, and we would start kind of with a bang and that way kind of get to our intended finish lines within 7 books.
I mean, hell, if you want to, this is the way I would address the Stannis thing. If you're going to do like a 1-year time skip, because 5 doesn't make any sense for that character. But a 1 year, like, you can kind of stretch it. You can say, okay, maybe he spent a quarter or a third of that year. He's preparing his northern conquest. Then we see him going to maybe the mountain clans. That takes a little while, interacting with all these different people, trying to buy them into, what he's doing. He then goes to Deepwood Mott. Asha's been there for a good amount of time now. You have that plot. Then they plan, okay, what's their next move? They realize, okay, we got to go to Winterfell. And then all the while, they could have also had, George could have had the weather be an actual big effect. So where, how it is in his march to Winterfell, it takes double the time that it would have taken. And so you could have that being a huge factor where Stannis has to really plan out when he marches, right? If there's a snowstorm for, a number of weeks, he can't march, right? So then he waits till there's a day where it's not a blizzard. not outside for me when I'm recording. It is snowing. We're gonna get like 3 to 4 inches or something. You don't have that. So there's ways I think it could have been worked around, and George might even kind of, looking back, thinking maybe he should have done things differently, which would have helped him. But unfortunately, we're not in that reality. George has put himself in a position where he can't do what he likes. Like he just cannot keep making more things that could possibly happen or bringing up things like, and that's the thing that George likes to do. Dance and Feast are very clear indications that George likes to build out his world. He likes to take his time with getting characters, to here, but it just, we're getting to a point where, George, you're getting older. We're trying to get this into 2 books. You got to start cutting it down. You got to start, doing what if you're going to do it in 2 books, like we've discussed at lengths about, having another book, but yeah, I feel like we're kind of going in circles. So let's kind of end this one out. I think we both are kind of in this position where I agree with you. I think he's going to get the Horn of Winter. I could see him blowing it at the end of this book, but I could also see something like you're talking about where he just gets possession of it by the end of this book, and then we kind of start out the next book with him preparing to go to Cersei and all that stuff. So yeah.
That's also a possibility too. Like Euron Greyjoy doesn't necessarily. Maybe he doesn't necessarily have to be within the geographic vicinity of the wall. He can blow it from anywhere on planet Toast, and just by blowing it, the wall comes down. That's very true as well.
I also want to point something out because I don't think we really discussed like why, we might think that he would know this horn that Sam has, it could be this Horn of Winter that brings down the wall. Just based upon the fact that Euron has gone to Old Larry. He already has interactions with a magic horn. That doesn't seem to be like some big coincidence with Dragonbinder. It just seems like if there was going to be a Horn of Winter that's been alluded to, this would be the character that would know about it. But yeah, I want to thank you, JC, for coming on the channel, both in today's video and tomorrow's video. It makes these videos much more enjoyable for me. It's not just me talking to myself in the basement.
Likewise, always good to talk with you, Grease. It's great to have someone to talk A Song of Ice and Fire with, and also great to interact with the community here. Grease, you got a great community, a lot of lovely people. Thanks again for watching Grease and I talk on stuff.
Yep, and also if you enjoyed the video, please go over to JC or the Advocates channel. It'll be the top link in the description. It's been on screen the whole time. So if you're not subscribed, what are we doing? Well, I don't know what we're doing. You're kind of moving sus.
Thank you.
But yeah, so we'll see you guys in tomorrow's video and then maybe in the future. So bye, guys.
Bye.